Well, good to see you again, Eric. It's been a while since you came on True 30. Good to see you again, sir.
Yes, you too, Joey. Thank you. Pleasure to be back. It's always a good time.
We had you on the show in 2023 to talk about special police units, and we specifically talked about Scorpion, which was a Memphis unit that did some bad things and killed a young man named Tyree Nichols. And Scorpion, by the way, for our listeners, is an acronym for Street Crimes Operation to Restore Peace in Our Neighborhoods, which the irony of that was pretty thick. And as we discussed at length during the show, this unit was disbanded in 2023 because of the beating of Tyree Nichols. And the officers who were part of the unit, what was highlighted in the investigation was the aggressive tactics, the lack of supervision, the over-policing, the tone and tenor of the individuals, and it was all dudes. So it was one of those things where if you look at the brutality of this and the dissolution therein, it happened. And it's a big part of the conversation that I want to have today. And the reason I invited you back on the show, I gave your storied background in the introduction and a recorded introduction so people understand that you're a former police chief and ran a very big department, captain. And that's really what I want to get your expertise on today is what is happening at the leadership level with ICE, what is happening on the ground with the enforcement agents, what is that training that they have implemented today versus where it was, a year or so ago, and then what are the deleterious effects of this as a group and as a macro discussion. And so I think that's really where we can dive in. Oh, also, I do want to preface this for the listeners and anyone else who's out there, is I don't have an issue with ICE as an institution historically. In my own homework, obviously they've done some things that haven't been investigated. They had deplorable conditions in the detention centers. There's been sexual manipulation and sexual harassment with some of the people in the detention centers. There's been some issues with use of force. So I'm not saying that ICE historically has been perfect, but there's a pretty big delta between ICE of 2 years ago or even a year ago and ICE today. And so I want to make sure that people understand that I'm not going after the institution as a whole. The abolish the police, the abolish ICE thing is not in my vocabulary. Do you believe that ICE agents are trained to work with the public?
Not at the level that you're seeing. So, working with federal agencies, and I've worked with all of them over the years, their mission is very specific. All right. If you're DEA, FBI, ICE, and there's even, plethora of other federal agencies out there doing different things, but their mission is very specific. And generally, they don't come into a lot of contact with the general public. We're seeing something really different right now through the National Guard, through ICE, primarily. You don't see the FBI out in mass or DEA at this point, but you do see ICE out in mass.
Yeah, and I think that part of what we learned in our discussion with Scorpion is that the leadership was removed and they removed the unit as a group. And I do want to talk specifically to the leadership here. Obviously, Donald Trump is our president, but the people here in charge are Kristi Noem, head of HHS, Stephen Miller, and those two leaders have made it clear how aggressive they want to be. Stephen Miller, and I quote, said this numerous times on television agencies, specifically Fox News and other conservative news platforms. To all ICE officers, you have federal immunity in the conduct of your duties. Anybody who lays a hand on you or tries to stop you or tries to obstruct you is committing a felony. You have immunity to perform your duties, and no city official, no state official, no illegal alien, no leftist agitator or domestic insurrectionist can prevent you from fulfilling your legal obligations and duties. He also asserted that the Department of Justice would pursue officials who cross the line into obstruction or criminal conspiracy against the United States of America. And so this was also part of our discussion. When you take an arm, and I think we talked about this off camera, but they hired 12,000 new ICE officers or agents on the ground in the last year. So they went from 10,000 to 22,000, correct?
Correct.
And so that being said, if you have this kind of macho aggressive tone and tenor, and you're hiring people that have approximately 47 days of training. And I don't know what your homework has pulled, but that's kind of what I've seen. They truncated the process to get people on the streets as quickly as possible, and they removed many of the necessary pieces to understanding the tone, tenor, training, and screening of the individuals that they've hired. And so,
Yeah. Sorry.
go ahead. I was just going to say, as a former captain who is in charge of these types of training and deployment and overseeing and governance, does that concern you at all?
Well, yeah, it should be a concern to everyone. And so, yeah, you're correct. So what they did was the ICE agents under DHS, they have had a 25-week training program. Okay. They would go 12 weeks on nuts and bolts, just like every cop in the country gets. Use of force, policy, procedure, tactics, legal issues that are general to policing. And then they would do 13 weeks of very specific training under about 17 different, what we used to call modules, but 17 areas that ICE is responsible for. And I don't think a lot of people even understand how many things ICE is responsible for. This is one component of what they do. They do not train in crowd control. The way that federal agencies work, if they need perimeter control, crowd control, or logistical support in that fashion, they call the local agency. Okay. So, but in late 24, that was dropped to 8 weeks. So 47 days, whatever it is, it's 8 weeks of training that they went. So less than half of what they were doing. And their explanation was, well, we took out the Spanish language training and there was a lot of redundancy. I understand how inefficient the federal government is. You're so inefficient that you could drop to less than half your training because of redundancy? No. Yeah. Federal agents are extremely well-trained, extremely well-trained. So no, that's not the case. They had to shed a lot of stuff. Also, that included a mentoring program.
Right.
That 25 weeks, it's like an FTO program, we would call it, a mentoring program that should extend out onto the street. So that mentoring program, if it even survived the cut, would only be 8 weeks. And now you have enough trainers out on the street to train up 12,000, a 120% increase in personnel. I know we couldn't do that. I don't know really any agency who could do that. You have enough background investigators to take a 120% increase in background investigations, psychological exams, all the things that go into that generally take 6 months to a year of hiring procedure to get through? No, you don't. It's just not possible. And I'm sure, the people doing that, they want to do a great job. That's their purpose. You can't give them 120% load increase and expect that the job's going to get done. So now you have, to your point, now I've got 12,000 new agents in the last year put out onto the street, agents and officers, because, we don't need to get into the weeds, but there is some uniform presence and there's a lot of investigative presence for them. But at any rate, they're all out there now. They have 8 weeks of training, not 25.
Yeah.
I don't see how they have enough field trainers and field supervisors to keep an eye on everyone. I don't see how that's possible. So you've got a lot of people out there that are probably trying to do the best they can in most cases. In some cases, we have people out there that should not be out there, period, at all. And that will cause problems. It's already probably causing problems, and those problems will continue to mount for that. So, yeah, I would have tremendous concerns over this deployment. Now let's switch. Well, let me take a break, see if you have any comment, and we'll talk about tenor and tone.
No, I mean, that's why I wanted to bring up the Scorpion discussion, because it was a microcosm of what we're seeing here at scale, right? Yeah. So if you have 3,000 agents in Minneapolis as one example, there's 600 peace officers in the state. So they now have 5 times the amount of police officers, and the police officers themselves are getting wrapped up into the tone and tenor of the community, because they're basically as mad with the peace officers as they are with the ICE agents, and the duties are completely different. and their bosses are completely different, and their training is completely different. So yeah, I think that let's get to the tone and tenor, because that was something that I think part of my reporting, and my audience remembers this, but I spent about 6 months reporting on defund the police. And I was, as a former ad guy, I was upset really about the bumper sticker nonsense of that claim, right? It didn't make any sense to people that were trying to help things out. It didn't help anyone out. You don't defund, a police department. And Minneapolis got hammered on that, right? Because that was the origin after the murder of George Floyd. And the chief of police actually was recently on the Daily, the New York Times podcast, to talk about how scared he was about recruitment and about people leaving, because during the 2020 nonsense of defund the police, they lost a lot of officers. They went to retirement. A lot of people didn't want to put up with the abuse they were getting from the public. And these protesters, specifically progressive individuals, saying that they wanted them all out, and they lit the police department on fire. There's a lot of stuff that was going badly. And he said it took him 4 years. And this is a very measured police chief. I was very impressed with his tone and tenor and the way he came about. He came out of New Jersey, and they brought him down here to fix the department. He was doing I think, a pretty good job based on all the homework I've done. And now he's genuinely scared about how he can even retain the staff he has and recruit new officers, to be on the beat. And so, yeah, I think tone and tenor is a good next discussion.
Right. So, the tone and tenor from the local police you're seeing is the same as every local police chief who number one wants to keep their job, and number two is dedicated to their city and organization. There's, hundreds and hundreds of police departments throughout the country, and
yeah,
they all have a different mission, tone, tenor, and everything based on their communities and their bosses and the people they're policing and employing. So, his is very specific to Minnesota. And you hear a lot of people criticizing the chiefs, especially Seattle, Portland, Minnesota, which would be, the ones considered more liberal cities. But those chiefs have a job to do. They still have to police their communities, and they have to make their citizens and bosses happy. So their tone and tenor is going to be towards that.
Yeah.
Federal government has a different relationship with all 50 states and beyond that, in multiple states with different organizations. And generally, their tone and tenor is much more toned down because they're trying to speak to a mass of partners, which used to be partners.
Right.
And, assure them that they're not going to come in and blow things up in their communities. That was always the working relationship. Okay. That's what I experienced for 27 years in the North Bay area, certainly not a conservative bastion of politics and policing.
No.
The federal government, the feds who I worked with there, consistently worked to keep the peace. All right. We need you guys. How are we going to do this to keep the peace so we don't blow you up in the community? Everyone gets their job done. And in essence, no one knows we were even here, basically. Which was, kind of the modus operandi for us.
Okay.
And now, that kind of tenor that they're putting out now, it's going to be very inflammatory to multiple communities in several states, number one. Number two, it's really not true. No law enforcement officer performing their duties out there has complete immunity from anything. That is a very dangerous thing to tell your troops. The message sending out should be professionalism, ethics, and, ethical, moral policing, professionalism, follow the law, and please don't get us sued.
Right.
That's the general tenor. No one wants to be sued. No individual or organization, city, county. And if you're telling people, hey, you have complete immunity, if anyone puts your hands on you, it's deadly force. No, it's not. Most, resisting is misdemeanor level resisting, someone, pushing you, maybe taking a swing or kicking at you, trying to get away.
Yeah.
You can't shoot that person. You don't have complete immunity to do whatever you want to that individual at all. If someone tries to shoot you or run you over, now we're in new territory. But there's a lot of things leading up to that, that you have a responsibility to keep yourself out of and keep them out of as well if you can. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that later. So this tone and tenor that, hey, you go out, you kick butt, don't worry about these local cops. Don't worry about these local politicians. Don't worry about the local community. You just do what we tell you. And if anything goes wrong, you're good.
Right.
You won't get prosecuted or sued. Well, it is very hard to prosecute any police officer, especially a federal agent. We saw that, at Ruby Ridge and some other incidents. Very hard to do that, but that doesn't mean someone won't try and put you on the hot seat for several years in a prosecution. And you certainly can be civilly sued. It is hard to sue the federal government, but it is not impossible. And especially, in today's climate, a good chance you will get sued. So all of those kind of statements that, the rhetoric on both sides is not helpful.
No. And that's a good point. I think that, if you look at some of our state representatives, AOC and a couple others are saying abolish ICE, which is, for me is like, did you learn anything from defund the police? It's not about abolishing, it's about doing it right. And I think that if you understand that the institution has a place and a purpose specific to borders and immigration, enforcement, I don't think anyone of reason says we shouldn't have borders. I've actually had discussions with progressives that say we shouldn't have borders, but I don't find them reasonable people. So the idea is you need the borders, and if you need the borders, you have to demarcate those borders. And if you do such a thing, you need people to enforce those borders, right? So that's kind of where I think a lot of the rhetoric gets lost. And then if you move from peaceful protests to lawlessness, lighting cars on fire, throwing rocks at police officers and ICE agents, now, you're doing, in my opinion, you're playing into the hands of a very aggressive administration. And I've said this for the last couple of weeks. What I was scared about was, President Trump saying, I'm going to declare an insurrection act, and I'm going to put actual military boots on the ground in Minneapolis to quell the protests. That's something that's never happened, in modern history. It's not something we ever want to happen in modern history. But I think that's the issue for me specific to leadership, because and we know that we made jokes about this, but if you take 8 dudes and you go to a bachelor party, right? There's an energy with those guys, right? And I've been that knucklehead, and it's one of those things where if you don't have anybody supervising, you have no governance, and you basically think you have immunity or impunity for anything you want to do, this is what you're seeing, right? And it's not just the fact that they're doing these arrests. It's that if you look at Jonathan Ross, the officer, I think most discussed today after the shot Renee Good in the head 3 times. This was a guy who was highly trained, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things where I wanted to get to that later, but since I have him, it's his training was not like the officers that you see today. And it goes against kind of the discussion that we were having, around this. This is Jonathan's background. So his military service, he's an Iraq war veteran. He served in the Indiana National Guard from 2004 to 2005. He worked as a machine gunner on a gun truck. He was a Border Patrol officer from 2007 to 2015. After returning from Iraq and after college, he joined the U.S. Patrol. He worked primarily in El Paso for about 8 years, traditional border security work and field intelligence. And he moved to Immigrations and Customs in 2015. And in his role, he served as a deportation officer. He had training beyond the academy, which at the time, to your earlier point, was significant. And he trained in U.S. immigration, criminal procedures, civil rights, firearms, defensive tactics, emergency vehicle operations, tactical communication, and constitutional law.
Mm-hmm.
And he specialized. He was a firearms and active shooter instructor. He was a special response team for SWAT. He's been part of the ICE enforcement and removal operations, which is an SRT team. He joined a terrorism task force. This is a very credentialed, 43-year-old officer who, by all definitions and everything I can see, and I've talked to numerous peace officers before we chatted, is that he violated almost everything on a basic level that you're not supposed to do. Can we just start there with what he did, stepping in front of the car, holding a phone in his hand?
Right.
I mean, I don't understand. Just the phone in his hand alone is just egregious to me in the sense of following standard operating procedure. I mean, I'll let you talk. Just
Yeah. So same thing that, like you said, I looked at his history. He's a very, very experienced agent.
yeah,
We don't want to, again, their mission's a little bit different. In some testimony he gave when he was injured last year in June, when he was drugged by a car,
yeah,
and in testimony, he said he had made over 250 traffic stops and was well versed on, you know, officer safety, traffic issues, dealing with people in vehicles. And that probably occurred at the Border Patrol. I doubt as a nice investigative agent, he made those type of stops.
yeah.
Again, and Border Patrol stops are a little different, but they're traffic stops. So you would never, and then I've talked to a lot of my colleagues too, you're not going to see CHP or NHP in my case now, or local police walking in front of or behind occupied vehicles, especially running. That vehicle was running, it was moving at different points. That is just a training that's just hammered into you, among many other things, for traffic stops because they're dangerous just in general. But walking in front of or behind the vehicle at any point, you will literally get yelled at
Yeah.
by your training officer. Or if, to this day, I can't walk between even parked vehicles, and it's been years.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The second thing is holding anything in your hands during the stop or a contact like that. Yeah, holding a phone in your hand, it's a massive distraction. It's a huge safety issue. Now, they are issued body cameras, but not all of them have them yet.
Okay.
So I don't know if he had a body camera. The great thing about the body camera is, and they are required to turn it on during any enforcement action. I kind of feel like maybe he didn't have one because that would have solved that problem for him. But he is filming. And at one point he's filming with his right hand.
Right. Which is his shooting hand.
Never put anything in your gun hand during a contact. Okay. Ever. And that is just another thing that's just hammered into you.
Yeah.
I still have problems holding stuff with my right hand, because
Most
for
of them
years it's a huge issue.
Yeah.
But he switches it to his left.
Yeah.
And you actually can see him going to cover his gun when he comes around the vehicle. Okay. So he was feeling something was either escalating or about to escalate. And pretty much at that time, the other two officers rush up, start yelling, reach into the vehicle, which is another huge safety.
Exactly.
He never reached into the vehicle.
No.
Last time he did that, he got dragged. Injured.
Yeah.
But the other agent reaches into the vehicle, lunges in while he's yelling, and then she panics.
Right.
All right. There's multiple reasons. One of them is people will panic.
Sure.
She panics 6 seconds from that escalation to the shots fired, 4 of which killed her. 6 seconds.
6.
That's how fast, and that is not uncommon. That's how fast things escalate, which is why you never put yourself in those positions of disadvantage and danger, because your reaction time now, just like he was, you have limited options.
Yeah. And
you have to make a decision in a second of what you're going to do. And here we are. So, now that's a trained ICE agent, a well-trained ICE agent.
Right.
We've got people running around with 8 weeks of training who've probably never, ever, ever made a traffic stop, have never contacted a civilian in a hostile environment. Okay. And now let's switch to environment, the impacts of environment on you. I have been boots on the ground and in large-scale protests. And I'm telling you, they're chaotic. They're disorienting. They're scary.
I bet.
If things start to really turn, like in the George Floyd ones.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of training, experience, and discipline to hold yourself and do what you're supposed to do and, fight off instincts to do other things that, are going to cause problems. they've been in that environment for weeks without a break. There's no way they're taking long breaks. This guy came back after 6 months, of being seriously injured, and he's back out there. They're in that environment, pretty much their entire work shift of hypervigilance, danger, trying to watch what's going on while executing their normal job, which is administrative and criminal warrants,
Right.
picking people up. And they're not trained to do that, number one. And they are not getting anyone else to do it for them. All right. The Minneapolis PD couldn't even come up with the bodies to do this if they wanted to. So really it's down to they're kind of out there on their own. I'm not saying that the PD is not supporting them. I'm saying is the PD is trying to keep its distance. I guarantee it, from this mess, because they have a whole community they need to police. They don't want to get sucked. This is not their rhetoric. This is not their mission, nor their tactical plan to execute it. That's on ice. And so they're really stretched thin now and trying to balance this. There is no cop working on the street that wants to see a federal agent injured. But also, there's not enough cops to prevent that from happening, especially in an environment they didn't create of this chaos and violence that now is down there. So, yeah, you can easily get overwhelmed. Even a very experienced, well-trained, well-disciplined officer has a cutoff point where things start going out the window, mistakes starting to get made, the stress level is too much, too high. You can't take it all in and make multiple evaluations and decisions like that. There's no such thing as multitasking. It's, you're going to do one thing well and the other 10 things are going to suffer.
So let me ask you this. When you guys are recruiting peace officers as an organization, what is it that you look at specific to personalities? Is there something that you can test for? Is it just the oral interviews? Is it the background checks? What is the entire holistic approach to choosing the peace officers that you eventually hire and put into the academy? What does that look like?
Well, what it generally looks like, and it does for the federal hiring as well, is, it starts, at the application process with, what have you done? What is your life and world experience? That's changed a lot over the years, from when, now 30 something years ago, when my experience in life was probably different than a lot of, it is, because I did a lot of the hiring. It's changed, but you're still looking at, what kind of life experience does this person have that would help them work with other people, engage well with other people, make good decisions, be good critical thinkers. So their education, their life experience, starting right there.
Okay.
At that paper cut, if you want to call it that. Are you qualified on paper even to move forward?
Yeah.
From there, you're going to go to a series usually of some kind of written evaluation. We did a written test and a report writing test to make sure that you have the basic skills. You do a lot of writing, and it also tells us how you think and how you perceive things.
Okay.
What you just saw in the incident, can you translate that to paper correctly?
Right.
Is your perception, pretty well correct and honest?
Yep.
So you're going to do that. From there, if you move forward, you're going to go to the oral boards, where you'll sit with a panel of 3 to 5 or whatever people it is, and they're going to ask you questions generally designed over what that organization's looking for. So the Santa Rosa oral board is not the same as the ICE oral board.
Right.
Where it is the same, or should be the same, is we're going to ask you questions. Are you going to be a good fit for our organization, our philosophy, our mission, the way we think and want things done? And are you a good fit in our community? Are we comfortable giving you a gun, the power to take freedom and life, and putting you in a patrol car to wander around with our community and citizens? Are we comfortable with that?
Okay.
Or at least do we think we are at this point?
Right.
So if you get past that, Yeah, now you're getting into the background check.
Okay.
So you're going to go, and an investigator is going to go out, talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your wives and girlfriends and ex-wives and girlfriends, um, go over your schooling, everything you've done, your military records, other organizations, personnel files. That's a process, takes time.
How much time does that take historically, and or how much time do you give it in your department?
Usually, depending on the load on that investigator, that's a couple month process right
Okay.
there.
Okay. So that's not easy. And how
Not
long
easy.
does like the written test, oral test, is that a 2 week, a month? I'm just trying to get the timing here.
Generally, we could get people on a hiring process within a month or two through all that stuff.
Okay. And then the background check's another 2 months. Okay.
Yeah. So you're probably 3, 4 months in now in
Okay.
your journey.
Okay.
Once we get that, background back, then, and a lot of times the background will include a polygraph exam.
It
as
does.
well.
Okay.
So you got to schedule and get that in there.
Yep.
And then we're going to go to the psych exam. And you're going to go down and sit with the psychologist and do the MMPI 10,000 cross-referenced, things that
Okay.
you're going to fill out. Do you like fire? All the great little things that are in there.
Yeah.
And then you're going to sit with the psychologist who's going to evaluate you and then give us a report and say yay or nay. They don't say yay or nay; they give it a letter grade.
Okay.
And then you go from there. And again, the psychologist is looking for, your critical thinking ability. Do you have a acceptable level of empathy in your mindset to understand people and empathize with what they're going through, and so on. So they're going to be measuring several personality aspects to try to be sure that you're a fit for the job, you can handle it, and you can handle it long term.
Okay.
And then some organizations will have critical thinking tests, BPAT evaluate. They could throw all kinds of extra things in. There is a physical agility for people. So you're talking, a 4 to 6 month process
Just to get to the academy, if you're
to get to the academy.
yes.
All right. Now you're talking in California, 5, 6 months, wherever they've gotten themselves up to.
Yeah.
And so now you got 5 or 6 months of that. Then you're going to come out and go with your field training officer minimally for 4 months.
Right. That's what I understood from my interviews just recently on this with other peace officers. So this is about a 1.5 year long process.
Yep.
Not truncated.
That's just to get you out there with the feeling that you're not going to do anything crazy, and you're going to be able to contact people. You understand your safety, rights, laws, everything you need to understand, and you know who to call when you don't, and get someone out there, your sergeant or a senior officer or whoever, until you're really, really comfortable and cruising. 3 to 5 years, depending on the person.
Right. That's the joke we made offline because a lot of our mutual friends said the same thing. He said, yeah, it's not that you're worthless, but you're not a dependent for about 5 years because there's so much to learn. And a lot of what he was talking about, and you've also shared this with me previously, is that it takes a while emotionally to understand the role of being a peace officer. And I think that the term itself, peace officer, is kind of what we were talking about before. If you believe that the pace of the pack is dictated by the speed of the leader, which I do, then the leadership is very important in the sense that it says, oh, we're here to conduct peace. We're here to help keep the peace, right? That's the idea behind most officers. Now, again, I've been criticized for being biased to cops. I'm not saying that there's not bad cops out there. I'm not saying you and I talked specifically about bad cops the last time we were on the show. So I'm not saying that everyone's perfect, but the idea behind what I see as most concerning for ICE and our citizens nationwide is this lack of training. The fact that you just illustrated a 1.5 year long process to actually screen out the tone and tenor of the proper people we want, the men and women we want to serve, the proper training, the understanding, the emotional absorption of all that takes place, the field training officer being with them in the street, watching and having someone mentor them through this for 4 months. Then 2, 3, 4 years later, you're kind of like, okay, I'm prepared for this. And then to your point is that it's rare that a police officer or a federal officer or anyone would be standing in the level of anxiety that they've been in Minnesota, as an example, for a prolonged period. This is
Right.
this is the thing that's going to get worse exponentially, because if all of these officers who are not trained or not screened, they don't have the proper tone and tenor, they don't have a field training officer experience, they're scared to death. And now you have them standing in front of really angry crowds of people with some valid reasons to be angry and some valid reasons to be scared. And they're going to take it out on each other.
Yeah, or they're going to do very unpredictable things like Nicole Good did.
Yes.
And I wouldn't actually say that was very unpredictable. It was pretty predictable that she was going to put the car and try to escape.
Yeah.
But people will bring up the point, well, what she should have done is turned the car off, shut it down, complied, and got out. I agree.
Yeah.
That would have been a much better outcome. You're dealing with human beings and you don't know what they're going to do. They're unpredictable. Okay. So the same thing when you're putting any officer or agent under tremendous prolonged stress,
Yeah.
it is a danger that they could make worse decisions and unpredictable things that you don't want them to do, which is why, during crowd control, we rotate as best we can. We have to get people off the front lines.
Okay.
Because the mental and physical exhaustion takes a toll.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying they're just going to start shooting things up. No, but they might get injured. They might injure someone. It's harder to perceive what's going on and make good decisions under that immense stress, especially when it's ongoing. And you mentioned pace. So let's just keep in mind the pace of what they're doing. It's actually pretty impressive what they have accomplished in a year, ICE.
Yeah.
Now, they deported about 2.5 million people in 1 year. Now, one thing they did that was really smart was the self-deportation app. Here's $1,000 and a free ride.
Yeah.
The writing's on the wall. So, 1.9 million people said, I'll take that deal. The writing is on the wall. And I want to maybe be able to come back someday.
Right.
So I'll take that deal. Send me home. Let's see where this goes. And, maybe I'll come back someday. 605,000 were removed criminally and administratively.
Yes.
Last year, and granted, the Biden administration did not do a ton of enforcement, but the year before, 155,000 were removed. If you historically go back, they, arrest and remove somewhere in the neighborhood. It's been as low as 10, but I mean, somewhere in the neighborhood of probably that 100,000 range, 80 to 120, somewhere in there, interior arrests and removals. They made almost 600,000 interior arrests.
Right.
That is huge, even with 12,000 extra bodies.
Right. And that's also the biggest issue specific to how it's being done. Because I think if we go back to our earlier discussion, the people that I talk to in law enforcement and politics all say the same thing around, we know we need to remove and deport and detain and deport these folks that are here illegally. And then specifically what Trump was talking about during his campaign was getting the criminals out. No one's complaining about that either. If you're a convicted felon and you're in the United States of America hiding, I don't think anyone reason wants you here.
Terrorists.
Yeah, you want those.
Whatever.
And then, specific to that, if you look at, and this was another thing, the Chicago raid in September, when they had the Black Hawk helicopters and men rappelling from the sides, kicking in windows, and they had no arrests, by the way. There was no arrests for criminal activity whatsoever, and no federal prosecutors charged anything in that event.
Right.
And that was all for what? Was that the bluster? Was that to prove that they have the capacity to do these things? Was it for intimidation purposes? I mean, that to me sets the tone, which I don't think is necessary. And then to make sure we play equal, as I said before, what was taking place in Minnesota recently, lighting cars on fire, vandalizing, and assaulting peace officers and ICE officers, that's not the approach either, right? It just can't be. And I think that's where, for me, I think it's pretty obvious that if we slowed down Stephen Miller's quotas, which again, it's weird to have a quota for human beings.
Million. It's a
Yeah.
million a year.
Yeah. I mean, he's not going to hit it, right? Not even close. And, we won't get into this today, but if you look at the detention facilities, that's a whole nother story. We could do a whole nother story on that level of abuse and inhumanity and those pieces. So they're not capable of doing what they need to do specific to governance. So HHS and Stephen Miller and Tom Homan and all of these folks they all have the same exact vernacular on the news channels in which they visit and frequent. And that's very aggressive, and we're coming after you. And I agreed with you on the self-deportation idea. If you got 1.9 million people, or 1.9 million people out, it worked. And that was a good strategic idea.
Safely, and they just
Yeah. And like you said, they can attempt to come back legally, which I think was wonderful. And so it's not that the government has done everything wrong, but to me, I think the biggest problem is that you can't continue to recruit people, offer $50,000 rewards or $50,000 bonuses to come join for people that are ill-equipped to manage this issue. And then even bigger than that is, how is it that you're going to capture the trust of the American public when they know that all of these shortcuts have been put into place to hire these people, to get them on the streets, to fill a quota from a government that has proven to be overzealous and overwrought specific to this, this event?
Yeah. And I think what's going on is a few things here. One is understanding kind of how ICE operates or normally operates. They're operating kind of how they normally do on steroids.
Yeah.
In that, there's administrative removals and there's criminal removals. You hear some people saying, well, it's not a crime to enter illegally. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is absolutely a crime.
Yeah.
But the way that ICE views it, the government views it, is it's an administrative violation. It's not civil, it's administrative, meaning you crossed the border, you didn't break any of our laws, you're not a bad person, but you're not supposed to be here. It's a crime for you to do that. So ICE can issue an administrative warrant without a judge. They serve it and they send you home.
Yep.
Okay. The criminal warrant is a criminal warrant like every other police agency on the face of the planet deals with. You've committed a crime, you have a warrant for your arrest. If it's a felony, we can enter your house. If it's a misdemeanor, we can't. You cannot forcibly enter on an administrative warrant. That's why a lot of these are happening in public.
Right.
Which is their normal procedure is to get you in public because they can't force entry into your home on.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a big piece for people to understand. You cannot go and arrest someone for a misdemeanor at their home or their business, or is it just their home?
Just their home. So,
okay.
But you can arrest someone at home on a misdemeanor during certain times, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. for a criminal warrant. An administrative warrant is not criminal. No judge issued it. Therefore, you cannot forcibly enter the home.
Okay.
Knock on the door and ask them to come out or come in. But really what ICE does is, the smart thing is, they just wait till you leave your house and they sweep you up and take you out of the country. And the criminal warrant functions like every other criminal warrant. Traditionally, ICE is about 50-50, 40-60, 50-50, half criminal, half not. Right now, they say they're at 70-30, which may be true. I imagine they're over 50-50. Okay. They are rounding up a lot of criminals. But if you have 600,000 people, what that basically means is 180, 200,000 are administrative removals, meaning they're status offenders. And that's a lot. That's more than we arrested all of the previous several years.
Yeah.
So are we going to see that and feel it publicly differently? Yeah, you are. It's always been happening. And that's what, people need to understand. It's always been happening. All right. It's just on this massive, massive public facing scale. And I think this use of force thing is a couple of things. One, we do not have a subtle administration.
No.
Nothing's ever been subtle about Donald Trump. I mean, I've followed him for years and years and years, long before politics. He's not a subtle guy. And the tone of his administration is not subtle. Look at Greenland. Look at, the things that, he's in your face. That's his mode of operation.
Yeah.
And so these agencies specifically ICE, because they have the biggest mission, that's public facing.
Yeah.
That's the kind of mode they're taking on. Yeah, we are showing you we're serious.
Yeah.
And we have the power to do what we say we're going to do. Yeah, the federal government always has had that power. They have immense power. Trust me, run afoul of them and find out how much power they have.
Right. No, people aren't doing that.
Yeah, you don't want to be in that spot. And so they are definitely doing a bigger display of power in operations, but also what can be happening, like in Chicago, there may have been a tie of a really bad guy that they were after. And when they got there, there's no bad guy, but there's 20 admin offenders there. Well, guess what? They're going to take those 20 people and process them out.
Yeah.
Because that's 20 more bodies to add towards that million.
The quota. Yeah.
So you're seeing, I think, not just one thing. You're seeing kind of a mode of operation that's been really not public facing and in your face that now is. With a show of power meant to be a show of power and strength and resolve, which also is a big reason why you had 1.9 million people leave voluntarily.
Right.
And that will probably continue to motivate. And I have to imagine that's part of the strategy, right?
I would think. Yeah.
That, hey, these people will self-deport because they see what's going on. So I think you're seeing probably 3 to 5 factors kicking around in there. It's never only one thing, right? It's never only one thing.
No. And to those points, I think the one thing I wanted to also get your expertise on is, off camera, you mentioned something called the reasonable officer clause or standard. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, specific to the training and what we're seeing on the ground? Here's an example. Reasonable, we can stick with Jonathan Ross so we stay on the same incident. Sure. Someone is either him or his partner. There's confusion because during the tape it was, please, get out of here and or turn your car off. So she was being told 2 different things. After the shots were fired, someone called her a fucking bitch. Right? So
I've tried to find that.
We don't know who, right? And even Christina was interviewed by Jake Tapper on this, and she said, yeah, it's possible it was one of the officers. We're looking into that. We don't know.
Yeah.
But I have listened to numerous videos and other incidents with ICE where the language like that is very common. It's get the fuck out of the car. Fuck you. I mean, it's just dropping. It's aggression at a high level. I mean, does that alarm you as a former peace officer? And then does that take them outside of the standards of a reasonable officer's behavior or reasonable officer standard? What is that? I guess we should talk about.
Yeah. So first of all, the reasonable officer standard is what you're always going to be measured by in the courts. By a prosecutor trying to make a decision, by your department. Were you within policy? Are we going to discipline you, or are you all good?
Yeah.
It's the reasonable officer standard. And what that says is, for the average reasonable officer, when they likely behave the same way in a similar circumstance? Is it likely that other officers would behave and react the same way as you did in your circumstance? It is not. It also has other elements. Hindsight 2020 is not part of it. It is solely what information did you have when you made the decision, when you had to make a decision? What was available to you? Is it reasonable that that's all the information you had? You couldn't get any more somewhere else. So that's a part of it. A part of it is, did you not put yourself or someone else in a position of danger that escalated or caused a confrontation that was otherwise avoidable? That one's much more difficult and controversial. And actually, that's where all the controversy is over that 6 seconds.
Right.
So whose fault was that? Her fault, his fault, their fault? That's where that comes into hard play. The ICE does not have a duty to retreat.
Correct.
So they don't have to retreat from that situation. They do have a duty not to escalate unnecessarily a situation, but they don't have to retreat. So there's that goes into the analysis. So it's the reasonable officer analysis it has those components to it. And what it boils down to is if, hey, I threw Eric in the same situation as, Agent Ross, is there a strong likelihood Eric's going to do the same thing?
Right.
And then if I throw this officer and this officer in, are they going to be somewhere within his parameter thought process and reaction? That's what that is. Okay.
That's good to know. I appreciate that explanation because a lot of the officers that I talked to this last couple of weeks said that same thing you mentioned to me is that, if you walked into a donut shop, they said this is a joke, but if you walked into a donut shop and talked to three cops, he said 3 cops and said, would you ever put your arm inside a window of a car, a moving car or a car that was on it? They go, no, 100% no. That would never happen. Would you ever stand in front? No, I would never stand in front of a car. Would you stand behind it? No. Would you ever hold your cell phone in your hand? No.
Especially your gun hand.
Right, especially your gun hand. And so and this gets back, and then we could end maybe this on the qualified immunity side of things, because this was where Stephen Miller was like, you guys have immunity, no matter what you do, we got your back. And I'm paraphrasing. But this, even as a layperson, right, someone who doesn't know much about the law, I've obviously done a lot of homework as a reporter, but the idea here for me is that it seems like Jonathan Ross, the agent, violated so many basic practices as it relates to standard operating procedure that it can be possible for him to be prosecuted based on the reasonable officer standard. No?
Of course, it is possible. Yeah. I think the reason it won't happen is the FBI's got the investigation and they're not going to allow it. He could be prosecuted for a state crime.
Yes.
Right. Even if the feds say we're not prosecuting you on a federal crime or punishing you for federal policy, you still can be investigated and prosecuted on a state crime. Is that likely to happen in this case? Probably, because of the way things are going.
Okay.
It would be very, very, very difficult for a state prosecutor to do it. The FBI has the investigation, and it's pretty clear which direction they're going.
And you think it'll be difficult, for clarity, it'll be difficult to actually prosecute him even at a state level?
Yes.
Okay. And is that
just because of the way who's doing the investigation and how it's being done?
Okay.
And the state's been basically cut off out of it, so they would get whatever end result that DOJ wants to give them, right? It's pretty hard to prosecute under those conditions. And I'm not saying he should or shouldn't be. I mean,
no, understood.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is, yeah, it can happen, and it does happen. And it's difficult, but it happens. Now, as far as the other agent screaming, "Get the fuck out of the car, get the fuck out of the car," and reaching into the car,
yeah,
I don't like that. That's bad tactics.
Yeah.
It's going to escalate things. It's going to freak the person out, which it did.
Yeah.
The other voice, I believe, was the partner saying, go, get out of here.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what, so there was conflicting orders.
Conflicting words. It kind of escalated super quick too. They were kind of chippy, but I would say,
she's like, I'm not mad at you, dude. That.
They were typical chippy that you get.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, but they were chippy.
Yeah.
They were blocking the street, but multiple cars just went right past her, including Ross.
Right.
But an agent stopped and apparently it had enough of the nonsense in his mind. And it's like, I'm going to take her into custody. And it escalated super fast at that point. So as far as yelling profanities at someone, that is not something, we don't.
It's not a big deal.
It's actually a policy violation to use profanity in pretty much every department there is against the public, right?
Right.
You don't want to be doing that. When people get the adrenaline pops and people get jacked up, you'll hear that.
Yeah.
You'll hear them do that, especially if they're telling someone to drop a gun or something.
Yeah.
It happens.
Okay.
I've done it. Everyone's done it who's in the business. It's not effective as a common tool to swear at someone.
Right. Yeah, it's the whole you get more with sugar than vinegar problem. Yeah.
Right. You don't want, it does escalate. When you start throwing the F-bombs around and screaming at people, it's going to escalate things. I feel like it was a pretty fast escalation. And I understand she had been there maybe all morning, kind of being a thorn in their side. So maybe whoever that was getting madder and madder and madder. But it was a really fast escalation when he popped out of his truck and approached her.
Yeah.
And it changed, again, immediately changed the tone of the contact, immediately escalated, put us into that 6-second tragic window where we don't want to be. We want to be there.
Yeah. And so, Steve Miller talked about immunity for his team. And what you said earlier in the interview was that it's a bad thing to say that you have immunity as a broad blanket, but there is qualified immunity for peace officers as well as federal agents, right?
Sure.
And so can you talk a little bit about qualified immunity and what that looks like in plain English?
Well, what qualified immunity basically is if I'm performing my duties, I'm engaged in my lawful duties, going about my lawful business, which they were up to a point of contention on this.
Yeah,
they're out there doing what they're supposed to be doing. They are following policy, procedure in the law, and they are acting as a reasonable officer. They would be afforded qualified immunity if something goes wrong. If they're doing everything right and reasonable, someone gets hurt, injured, or killed, they would potentially probably be covered under qualified immunity. It really comes more into play nowadays in situations where something happens that's kind of outside the box, maybe unprecedented, we haven't seen before. So they couldn't have been trained and understand that.
right.
So they took an action, someone was injured or killed, and the courts will say, well, this is a situation where they couldn't have possibly known differently, so we're going to give them qualified immunity,
Right.
and they're no longer subject to civil penalties.
Right.
So that's what qualified immunity is. It's very much misunderstood. People think that what people think is like what he was saying. You're out there performing lawful duty. You have immunity from everything.
Right.
No, I don't. Once I do something illegal clearly outside of policy or, ethics that I'm, have taken an oath to, no, I can definitely be sued and I can certainly be prosecuted for it. And they're subject to that as well. Because otherwise, what that basically says is, hey, if they interfere with you, they're committing a violent felony. Well, you can react to violent felonies with deadly force.
Right.
Okay. So, and yeah, it is pretty violent to throw rocks at officers. And it's fairly common rocks, bottles, concrete come flying into your line. You can't just start mowing everyone in front of you down.
Right.
That's not the way it works. And you can't take shots at someone in a crowd, because if you hit someone else, you're going to be responsible for that business.
Right.
So I think that's a terrible message to send. It's an unnecessary message to send. Well, maybe it's necessary because in the 8 weeks of training, they never covered any of this.
Right.
These guys, but and ladies, but it's a terrible message to send to tell anyone with that much power and authority that you can do whatever you want and we've got your back. No.
Yeah. And I think that's
true.
No, and that's kind of where, and I'm really happy that you joined me today, Eric, because it's hearing it from me or a layperson who's just doing the homework, as opposed to someone who's been on the street, been in leadership, understands the importance of the tone, tenor, training, and screening. That's what concerns me most. And I've said this on other podcasts, not only my own, but others when I'm interviewed, is that I don't have a problem with the institution itself, with ICE or obviously the police, but my homework to what's been 3 years now, specific to policing, there's approximately 18,000 police departments out there, 800,000 peace officers. 80% of those officers have less than 25 beat cops. And so it's a very diverse group of people and thinking and organizations and leadership. And what we did learn, and what you helped teach me a couple of years ago, was that de-escalation was one of the biggest keys to success as a department, right?
Yes.
And we can end on that. What does de-escalation training involve, and how does it play out specifically? Number one, as an officer, and then number two, as a leader. How did de-escalation training affect your career?
Well, the de-escalation training, and when I came on, there was no official such thing.
Right.
I mean,
I learned that too.
Yeah. That's I mean, from a relatively new thing, really, probably really been hammered on in the past 10 years, especially since 2020,
Yeah.
obviously. So but what we would basically do is you want to take your officers, your agents, whoever it is, put them in those high stress, nonviolent confrontations and start teaching them the communication skills, tap into their empathy levels,
Yeah.
teach them time and distance, very important.
Yeah.
That's not retreat. See, you'll get a lot of people who say, oh, you just want them to get in their car and leave this, dangerous person in the middle of the street. No, time and distance is, I need to have enough distance, time, and space between me and you that I'm not forced to use deadly force.
Okay.
Forced to use an amount of force that's higher than I need to. So I have time to react to your movements. I have time to react to changes in what you're showing me, in your demeanor and your actions.
Okay.
There are very clear tells when a person's getting ready to assault you or thinking of assaulting you or thinking of running.
Right.
So, it's a kind of I want to be close enough to grab this person if they run, but I want to be far enough to react if they want to get violent.
Right.
To me.
Okay.
So you got to teach them how to talk to people. A lot of that is keep your tone level. Don't swear at them. They will key on that. I have seen it so many times.
Okay.
Your tone can be nice and level, and you throw out a swear word and they'll key on that. And, and so you don't want to throw those things out that they'll focus and key on and react to, trying to keep things calm and trying to get the conversation going.
Yeah.
Right. It is not fun to be in a fight. It is not, if someone's going to get hurt, it's not fun to use force, and it never looks good to the bystanders. Force is ugly.
It
If
is.
you're using force, you need to use enough of it to put this situation to rest in a hurry. And that is not well understood by just people standing around watching what's going on. So you really, it's about tone, it's about demeanor, it's about employing empathy, it's the time and distance. All these things go into that training.
Okay.
Maybe putting something between you and that other person, especially if they're holding an object.
Sure.
So I have a little more time. They've got to come over my patrol car or through this obstacle, to assault me with whatever they're holding. If it's a gun, and it's not a discussion at that point, but people will hold they'll hold knives, they'll hold things.
Right.
And, we're trying to have a good outcome for everybody because it's in everyone's best interest to have that good outcome, And so that's what the de-escalation training is. And in 8 weeks, are they getting a lot of that? I can't find what they're getting in the 8 weeks.
I can't either because there's nothing public, which doesn't surprise me with this administration. But I think that was the biggest thing I learned. And it was everything from, because per my previous interviews with peace officers throughout the country, it was the de-escalation of domestic violence and going into those situations, which they said was the most dangerous thing that cops deal with.
Yeah.
And so if you're going up to a house with a drunk man, usually a man, going after his wife or kids or whatever it is, that's where de-escalation training's very important. And I think the same thing stands with crowd control, because as we talked about earlier, crowd control is dealing with energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
The energy of anger or vitriol based on, and a lot of times valid reasons to be upset. And so if they think that I have this righteous indignation, I'm going to let it go, and it's in my right to do so, and then the peace officers and or the ICE officers are pushing back, that starts to grow. And that obviously is what we're seeing in mass throughout the United States and specifically Minnesota right now.
And you're going to have professional agitators in there.
For sure.
And they will, if you have a crowd of 1,000 people, you're going to have the majority of those people are probably didn't show up there to commit violence or cause a lot of problems. But professional agitators can get in there. They are good at changing the tone and tenor of the crowd.
Yes.
And they'll commit violent acts. They will throw things. They will do those things. You saw, the ICE agents' vehicles being torn apart and safety boxes, the steel boxes being pried open, weapons were stolen, body armor was stolen, documents. That's not your average protester.
No, that's a crazy person, and that's someone who should be arrested. That's another thing that
And he was a criminal,
Yeah.
a dangerous criminal and a gang member.
yeah,
But they're going to be in your crowd.
yeah,
They're going to be in your crowd, and trying to de-escalate crowds. That work gets done, a lot of it on the front end. And that's another problem with the federal agents being in these crowd situations. They don't have those contacts, those channels in the community to
Right.
do the front end work prior to these confrontations and protests, which the local police do. And if it's a good department and they understand crowd control, they're doing that work up front and behind.
What is front end work? What does that look? Give me a couple examples of front end work.
Oh, well, I'll tell you. So when we were in Santa Rosa, we knew which groups were advocacy groups. We knew which of those advocacy groups protest was a big part of their, of their thing. And we would have contacts with as many as we could. And if we knew a protest we thought one was coming, or we saw on social media one was coming,
Yeah.
we would reach out
Ah,
and we would say, hey, let's try to make this as safe and good for everyone. It was our general policy not to be seen
got it.
unless absolutely necessary. Because once you put uniform officers there, it will escalate especially among those people who are there for that purpose.
Right.
So our goal was always, if we get a good enough feeling that this is going to be peaceful, other than possibly facilitating the movement of traffic or whatever, so the streets don't get clogged up, if it's going to be lawful and peaceful, we're not going to put a presence down there.
You just don't.
We
Okay.
don't put a visible presence down. We'll just
Got it.
monitor it. Oftentimes we would have people ready to go if need be, but generally we don't even need to deploy at all,
Okay.
and everything goes great. If you know it's going to be a thing that is likely, like during the George Floyd protest that entire
Sure.
week, we had to have people out, up front. We could,
Right.
but we still made the contacts. We still tried to get,
Okay.
hey, let's get your peaceful family protesters, we suggest you get them off the street by 5 because a different element's coming at night.
Okay.
And it was a much different element that came in after the peaceful protesters. So you would have all day of good peaceful protesters, no problems, but then a different element would come in, and then we would have to protect against that. But how are the federal agencies? How are they even going to really accomplish even that upfront work to help them? They don't have those
They don't have those contacts. It's kind of like
relationships.
yeah, it's kind of like a reporter.
Contacts. And trying to get the police to do it at this point, it's going to be very difficult. That puts them in a tough situation.
Well, that's another thing. And I've talked to a lot of people that said within their own departments who did not want to come on and talk. So I appreciate you doing so. Is that they're having a hard time even working with ICE, which they've done historically. Like you said before,
Sure.
peace officers work with federal agencies all the time. And one of them even said, there's things that go unnoticed, but ICE agents are not even equipped to deal with the parked cars once they remove the people, right? So you see
Right.
them remove the people, and then the car either rolls down the road or it just sits and blocks traffic. And he said, that was actually a job of the partnership, whereas a
Yes.
local PD, you were like, hey, I'm going to take care of this.
We take the bodies.
I'm going to take the bodies, and I'm going to take
Yep.
the cars, and I'm going to do whatever I need to do. And so they're hesitant to even do that now because they don't want to be seen in partnership with these ICE agents who are coming across aggressive and lacking in training and tone and tenor and all of that. So yeah, I think we can just close it on this, Eric. I appreciate everything you did here and all the knowledge you shared, because it is something that I think it has been discussed in the media, but I don't think that the training is a big enough topic, because I don't think that anyone of reason, whether you sit on the left or the right side of the aisle here, specific to ICE, is that we do agree that there needs to be deportation enforcement.
Yeah.
We do agree that
always
we have borders, right? But we have to agree that things could be done better. They could be done with more measured practices. They could be done with better governance. They could be led with better ethos and empathy. as opposed to the machismo of let's go get them all and let's put quotas to them and let's try to intimidate people. It doesn't seem to be working. It's pretty scary. I'm from Minnesota. I have 3 cousins who are actually peace officers in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So I obviously have some biases and love for these people, but it's scary. And so I think it's scary for the officers. It's scary for the ICE officers. And obviously it's scary for the citizens of Minnesota right now, feeling that they've been, ransacked by federal officers.
Yeah. And I tell you what, it's hard to intimidate Americans.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not our culture,
No.
especially authority, government authority trying to intimidate an American, and now federal government authority trying to
Right.
intimidate an American citizen.
Right.
We are not built that way. So there's a real finesse to it.
Yeah.
The real finesse to it. And man, they were good at it. And we worked with them all the time, and they were very much understood. So it's really discouraging that those relationships are not existing.
Yeah.
That they can't get together and get this mission accomplished without what we're seeing. And this will have repercussions, at least for ICE and local agencies. This will have in certain areas, it's going to have longstanding repercussions that are, going to take years to straighten out back out with trust and everything. And big thing for me, I don't like to see people hurt on either side of these things. Obviously, I have a great love for law enforcement. I'm really concerned about the impacts it's having on these agents, especially the ones that didn't get the training and support that they may have needed.
Yeah.
I'm concerned as to why he came back so soon after his injury. And I've talked with many of my colleagues about it. It's pure speculation as to where his mindset is, but is his mindset in a good, comfortable place to return to that environment?
Right. Yeah, and that I've read about as well. There's the PTSD argument and what took place there, and is this man still suffering? And if he was dragged by a car, did he see that happening quickly, and then that escalated, changed his behavior? And obviously, that's going to be up for the courts and the investigation to come. But again, Eric, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate your expertise and your candor.
Great conversation. I love coming on, Joey. I appreciate you calling me. I'm happy to spend the time with you, and have a great day, man.
Thanks, man. You too.